The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you, and enjoy.
We're all drawn, every one of us is here because there's something about practice, around these practices of meditation or whatever it is, that they hold some kind of promise. And for me, one of the greatest joys is to be in community, in that inquiry. So I'm really, really grateful that two really dear friends from the wild-eyed yogi days of the ashram are here to share a little bit about practice. There's kind of an interesting distinction between, as I think of, I've mentioned before in talks, of sort of my maintenance meditation. That's the meditation that I do on a daily basis that's going to keep my nose above the waterline. But there's a whole other level of practice, which is the deeper transformative practices. And that's going to be our discussion here tonight. So I'd like to invite up Shobhan and Danna, if you would. We're going to start off with a reading from Danna, so I'll kind of have you here. And Shobhan, if you want to have a seat here. Shobhan and Danna have been affiliated with through Kripalu and myself I'm trying to think how long it goes, but a really, really long time. But we're going to start with a little reading. So if you'd like, you can close your eyes. And in your own way, just to let these words filter through your awareness.
It's called deeper practice. The call to deeper practice comes, and I respond before I catch myself. All that I am is drawn inside as if pulled by the strongest tide, a current flowing in only one direction. What does this practice look like? Slow movement paired with breath, attunement, trust, surrender. I listen within. Called forward, I let go into the unknown. Thy will be done, Lord, but at this depth, I cannot see the difference between my will and yours. There is only breath, the sound of one word, yes, repeating with each heartbeat. Yes, I still have an individual identity. Yes, there are still thoughts and preferences, yet these pale to insignificance before the door I've opened. I step inside the realm of spirit and let myself be changed.
Thank you, Danna. So there's something about letting ourselves be changed, and it's really fun to be here with you because we've gone through a lot of change over the years.
We came to Kripalu in the same month in 1981. May 1981, so that's how long it's been.
And there's something about that wild-eyed. I was 25, I think, and with a huge amount of idealism, as I know you did as well. But there's one thing that I find really, really interesting, that when I meet people who have a practice or interest in practice or depth practice, which is like, what's the call? Well, what would you say was your initial call to practice?
So first I just want to say hello to people that I know and people that I've yet to meet. I'd say there's two things. I was 22. And one of them I wasn't so in touch with at the time, but it was a deep pain and confusion that came from my family of origin. Like many people, I could say that I came from a little bit of a troubled family. In a way, it was a total American family in all the good respects, but it had this shadow, and I'll just say what it was and move on, which is I had a grandfather who sexually abused my two sisters. I didn't know about it at all. It was never said to me. I was young. And my family crumbled under the pressure of this family system problem. And I was absolutely in the dark about it. And it created tremendous confusion in my life. But at the time, I was just a young person growing up, and I wouldn't have identified myself as in pain or suffering, but I was, looking back. I definitely was. And then the second thing was there was really something positive, a drive I had calling me forward, something very healthy, something absolutely different than what I just described of, trying to move away from pain and confusion. There was something in me that knew there was more to life, that wanted more to life, and that was pretty bound and determined to find it, even if I had to go against conformity, even if I had to make personal sacrifices in terms of what was expected of me. And so those two forces, I think, combined to give me a very, very strong, I guess, spiritual drive.
We always talk of the analogy of this big circle and a line through the circle. Above the line is what you're aware of, and below the line is what you're not aware of. So a lot of what was driving you was sort of all the turmoil from kind of below the line.
So it would be 9 years before I heard the story of my family from one of my sisters. 9 years, absolutely, 9 adult years in the blank, in the dark, about these forces that were moving through that were so formative to me, but were never said to me to somewhat protect me as a youngster.
Wow. So we had an extraordinary opportunity. The community that we stumbled into, was sort of a classical ashram, you could say. It was what you call a lineage tradition. There was a very charismatic teacher from India who had another charismatic teacher, and there was sort of this magic of being able to do really depth practice. And I know in this tradition, and I know you're working on a book right now, that really makes a distinction between the practices that are designed for what's called a householder, someone who's living in the world with commitments and responsibilities, and the practices that are designed for a renunciate, for someone who can sort of do it full time. And I wonder if you might say a little bit about that, because we sort of had a taste of that, having poverty vows and celibacy vows and all of that. Anything you'd like to say about your sense of it? And the real question is that distinction really valid today? Between, if you really want to go deeper in your practice, like what are the guidelines that you feel are valid?
I really thought in our discussions, in preparing for tonight, of how I could nail what the distinction between what were considered these two paths were. So I'm going to say this, and we might need to go back and forth to make sure that it lands in the room. So the householder path was a path of setting the mind aside. So your life could be informed by enlightened awareness.
So how would you do that as a householder?
Let me make the distinction between that and a renunciate. The renunciate path was a path of dissolving the mind out of existence so you could be the enlightened awareness itself. So I'm going to say those again because this is like I'm saying in contemporary language what I'm trying to go right to the core. So the householder path was setting the mind aside entirely and learning how to do that so that your life could be informed by enlightened awareness. And the renunciate path is dissolving, and hear how intense this is, dissolving the mind out of existence so you can be the enlightened awareness itself. And as far as where we are in current spirituality, I believe these two strains have become somewhat woven together and somewhat mixed up in a way that is actually, that if we could straighten this out in contemporary terms, we would render both of those paths much more powerful, and we would have, as students and practitioners, informed choice about actually what we're trying to accomplish in these practices.
So setting the mind aside. So how?
Well, in our practice in the beginning of tonight, relax deeply in the body, tune into sensation. Okay, this is dropping out of the mind and into the somatic, field of feeling, and that practice, the mind gradually calms down. And you become able to set the thought stream aside, largely.
So you have more access to the witness, to the observer of change, and you become more identified with the observer as opposed to the granularity of every little thought.
So that little definition I gave at the beginning was speaking kind of technically to the end point, but let's talk about a little development progression. So what I said was setting the mind aside so that life could be informed by enlightened awareness. Well, what's enlightened awareness? That's a big question. At first, when you set the mind aside, what you're setting aside is simply the momentum and the distracted thoughts and the voices and, largely the unproductive agitation of the mind aside. So at first, that's all you're setting aside. So your life can be informed by better thinking, and less reactivity, period. So at first it's simply a matter of clearing the field a little bit, or we'll say calming the storm a little bit. But then gradually, as you become more proficient in these practices, you can truly set the mind aside, and you can have moments, let's just say moments, glimpses of what could be called a spacious awareness. And that spacious awareness might even refine to what you could call pure awareness or essential awareness or, ultimately true nature. So this is how you begin to just be informed by calm. And then you become informed by higher mind. But ultimately the object is to be informed by something that even lies beyond the mind, a primal intelligence from the core of our being.
So tonight's talk, which I forgot to mention the title of, is sort of the promises and the perils. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting question, like what in your view, what is the promise of engaging into practice?
So there is a singular power and intelligence undergirding existence. This is a big statement, but these traditions say that in loud and clear, and I can say that in my experience. There's a singular power and intelligence undergirding existence. Now, there's a difficulty with it. It can't be seen, although it's the source of our ability to see. Right? It can't be felt or smelled or heard, but it's the source and the root of all these faculties, of our ability to be awake and aware. Right? It can't be caught in the net of the mind. However, it's the root intelligence from which our mind arises. So the potential in these practices is to draw more and more on this, I'm going to say it in different levels, this instinctual evolutionary intelligence that's been with us and our species for untold generations. To draw on the empathic intelligence of the emotional mind and the, what yoga would call the emotional body, actually. Our emotions are an amazing sense of intuitive awareness, and especially relationally. And to draw on what yoga would call is, we don't just have one mind. Yoga would say that we have the thinking mind, which is called manas, which has its role in its kind of processing and reasoning ability. But we have another mind called buddhi, which is sometimes called the contemplative mind. It's the root of the word Buddha, which is basically perfect intelligence. It's the intuitive part of us that just knows and is highly, highly creative. And yoga would say that there's even a higher intelligence than that, which is a spirit, a transpersonal intelligence, that lies at the root of existence. So the potential of these practices is to let this light shine through us more and more, because it is natural and innate to us. But it's clouded over most of the time by overactive mind.
So you've been studying and translating and doing a lot of study on Swami Kripalu, who was a very, very depth practitioner, who kind of made this distinction, for those living in the world and those who can really step away from the world to dive deeper. What would you say are like, can you distill like the teachings for those who are really interested in experiencing sort of transpersonal mind but still have a mortgage to pay?
Well, the good news is that the householder path is not a dumbed-down version. It's not a second-class citizenship. It's a developmental acknowledgement that there's a ladder, and that ladder has to be climbed progressively. So Swami Kripalu said, trying to jump from here to the Renunciate path is like trying to jump from here to heaven. It doesn't work so well. So there's a developmental progression. So what's that look like? In the teachings of yoga, it's said very simply, but these teachings are not always expressed so simply. Maybe when we get into the pitfalls part, we'll speak about why. It's said that all human beings share 4 main drives in life, 4 what are called noble aims in life. So each of these is a noble thing. Okay, so the first one is artha, which is basically material security. So how many people would think that a spiritual path would be saying, first thing is you have to have a certain measure of security and stability in your life? That doesn't sound like, that's certainly not a renunciate teaching. Okay, and the second level is kama, is pleasure or enjoyment. Why that? If you're going to make an effort over a long period of time at spiritual growth, you have to be grounded in a lifestyle that is pleasant, that you enjoy. You'll have no sustaining power in an austere life that is difficult and hard, because eventually you'll either close to it or you'll just quit it, essentially. So material security, enjoyment, and then there's a level that's called dharma, and this is really saying that the first thing that you need to get in touch with is purpose. What is your purpose in life? What are you here for? What are your aptitudes and your interests? What lights you up? And that can be, something like, being an artist or whatever. That's what we often think about that. But it can also be like being a mother or a father, a good mother or father. People are called to that. Being a reliable, employee, being skilled in your profession, whatever those things are. So there's this actual developmental movement that I want to trace through with Dharma. So the first thing is you need to be living authentically, which means you need to be doing something that you choose to do because it's meaningful to you. That's a challenge in our world because we have, such an expectation on us of conformity. But if you're doing that level of Dharma, there's a progression. The first thing you will feel is self-esteem because you're doing things that you want to do, right? You'll feel passion to learn to become skillful in it and do it well. As you do it well, you'll garner the respect of others. You'll enjoy status. And this combination of skillfulness, status, authenticity, meaning will bring you what yoga calls fulfillment, essentially. Fulfillment is, something we know in psychology. So this is the first level of the whole householder path, is saying first you need to obtain fulfillment before you can really think about the fourth goal, which is moksha or liberation. That's a big word there. We'll come back to that in a second.
So it's kind of tied into Maslow's hierarchy of needs in many ways. Like make sure that you're not like you're secure and stable, and make sure that you are expressing the life that really feels authentic for you, and then really pay attention to your authenticity and your integrity.
This is totally in line with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The only difference is this is like 500 BC.
So when we're living in the world and with our responsibilities and commitments and all of that, then a large piece of this is around really asking, am I living a life of integrity? Am I living a life that I enjoy? Am I living a life that is giving me fulfillment? And when we do that, there's a quality of well-being. It's kind of an upward spiral, isn't it?
So the word integrity is a big word here, because if we're looking realistically in a grounded way and I don't want to dumb this down, so I'm talking truthfully to you as fellow truth seekers. If we're moving in the direction of wanting to know the highest, however we want to call that, whether we want to say transpersonal, whether we want to say spiritual, whether we want to say God or an atheistic orientation, if we want to move to the highest, we've got to move through this developmental ladder, is what yoga would call it. And this word integrity is a huge word, because they would say that as we develop, we become more and more sensitive to the right way to move through the life. And that inherent and implicit in this is a movement to greater levels of responsibility and ethical integrity. Not from a place of right and wrong, or not from a place of wanting to avoid trouble and wanting to receive respect, but from a place where in your being that there is a way to move through that's integrating, that's weaving your life together, and that's not only meeting your own needs, that's serving other people's needs, it's uplifting everyone around you. This is really the teaching, that if you live what's called the dharmic life, you will not only thrive and flourish yourself, but you will uplift everyone in your field. So Swami Kripalu said, establish yourself like a sun in the solar system of society.
And it speaks so beautifully to kind of the foundation of basically every tradition, which is to be really aware of your ethical behavior. And it's a big distinction between thou shalt not and how each one of these observances, whether it be truthfulness or non-stealing or whatever it may be, they really enliven and purify the sense of self.
The key difference here is that, so I was raised loosely a Catholic, right? So the orientation there was, you really want to do all the wrong things. And it's really the most fun to do all the wrong things. But, you should keep yourself in check, so you'll go to heaven at the end of your life. Something like that. I mean, I'm making fun of it a little bit, but that was basically the message. This is saying something very different. This is saying as you develop, it actually becomes more meaningful and fulfilling to have this sensitivity where your choice is not coming from, I wish I could, but I can't. It's coming from a place where you're pulled in a higher direction. And, you're pulled to serve. You're pulled to offer. And it's a joyous thing. And it's a choice. It's not a compulsion or a requirement. It's not like having to pass a test or overcome temptation to get something. It's different than that.
So I am living an unbelievably blessed life because I get to hang out with so many people who are sincere in their practice. And it reinforces my own practice, and all of that is really, really wonderful stuff. And there's so many studies now on the effect of yoga and meditation, how it basically purifies the body, the physical body, the emotional body, the mental body, our intuition, all of that. There's some incredible promises that have to do with becoming a better person. But then there's also this language around liberation, around freedom. And I think for many people that I've experienced and myself, I feel this sort of up-leveling when my practice is really working and I'm in integrity. But I want to spend a little bit of time, particularly, and maybe this is a bridge into when you move into extended practice or deeper practice, the perils and the pitfalls. What have you observed about the kind of the challenges when you move into deeper practices?
I want to make sure that we come at the end to the promises, because there are promises too, but the pitfalls are important. So the first thing to know is these traditions are full of languages that support both of these paths. And the language that supports the renunciate path are rather extreme, what I would call mindsets. Because if you're going to dissolve the mind out of existence, right? If that is your goal, you're steering towards an extreme outcome. Okay, you're steering towards an outcome where the ego, as we know it, and not only the ego, but the ego and even the higher kind of authentic self are rendered inoperative, and you're steered by something transpersonal and transcendent. So to support that intense outcome, there are teachings that are very attractive, that are compelling, and there is truth to them, and we can sense that there is truth to them. And yet the question is one of appropriateness in that developmental spectrum. So they say that the right teachings at the right time will make you a yogi, right? And the wrong teachings at the wrong times will make you what's called a rogi, which is a mad person, basically a lunatic, right? So in the initial way that this was taught, you had a teacher who had a very personal relationship with you, who was steering your development and delivered you stage-appropriate teachings. And here's the bigger thing. These were esoteric secret traditions in which you didn't get the other teachings at all until you were at an appropriate stage of development. And for most people, that stage of development was in somewhat the second half of life. So the teachings, as they were, said around the age of 50. So 50 is a better retirement age than 65, in my opinion, right? So the old retirement age was 50. So around 50, you began a process of passing on your responsibilities to the next generation. And you gradually were to focus on the more inner side of life. And that's when those teachings became really appropriate.
So the phases of a life were to be a child, then to be a student, and then to be a provider for your family. And then when your worldly responsibilities are complete, then devotion towards
an ultimate. And that provider for the family was also, it's interesting, a provider to the family, but also an uplifter of society. They're very high, noble purposes.
So I'm aware of time. I want to ask you, because I know that you've lived a huge amount of responsibility. You were, the Kripalu Center's lawyer and served as president and board chair and all kinds of wild stuff. And in all that while, you've had a very deep practice. But 3 years ago, you had the opportunity to really live that monastic life that you had felt called to. Can you say a little bit about what that looks like, and what it's been like to be able to do that?
So here's one of the amazing things from my life, and I'm not generalizing and say that this would work for everybody or anything, but I came to Kripalu and I had a certain amount of genuine aspiration. That I really wanted this, and I was willing to sacrifice and work hard for it, and we worked hard, and I had no idea that I would serve for about 25 years before the thing that I thought that I was coming for would manifest. I mean, think of that. I would have been out the door in a moment, like 25 years later, right? But all that service and responsibility and, being married and being Kripalu Center's lawyer in the middle of the scandal that some of you may know about, Kripalu had a little bit of a scandal, just sex and money and power, nothing major, and Jonathan was director of social relations, director of communications and public relations, and I was the legal team. It was, but I'm aware of our time as well. So the miracle of my life is that aspiration came full circle when it was appropriate, despite myself. I would have jumped off the cliff long ago, but it wasn't right. And when it finally came my way, I would like to think that I was somewhat ready. And so I guess I want to speak as honestly as I can to you. So I'm not saying that, I was some, super intense practitioner or whatever, although I practice intensively all the time. And for these years, I was, I guess I should just make it simple and say it. So I would get up and I would meditate for an hour. I would do pranayama for about an hour. I would do hatha yoga for 2 hours. I would come back and I would do another hour of meditation. And at the end of the day, I would kind of do some of that again. And in between, I would work on this book. And I did that for about 3 years. And I'm still doing that to some extent because it's very natural to me. So what did I get out of that? Okay? I mean, just being straight to you and truth seeker to truth seeker. I saw into the roots of existence. Into my own existence and the existence of what feels like, from the best way that I can say my experience, the way creation manifests in a subtle to gross way of form. I mean, absolutely changed everything about me and my conception of the world and, my conception of human potential. So what were the difficulties? What were the pitfalls? The pitfalls that were so amazing to me was that the self, I would say, I don't want to say the ego because it sounds like I'm making something wrong, but the personal self would reform every time, completely, quickly, a little better every time, a little lighter, a little more transparent, but it would just reform again and again and again, like 2 years, 3 years. Think of this, it's like...
So your practice would sort of take you into kind of a sort of a transcendent state, but then
I think Danna's poem, and maybe once she reads at the end, says it very, very cleanly. Like the call to deeper practice comes, and I respond, before I can catch myself, and there is an ecstatic truth. There's a rapturous potential in all of us, not just me, or not just someone who does the crazy things that I just described for all the time. For anyone who learns to skillfully meditate and has a regular practice over time and has good pointing out instructions. That's what I would say that it was.
So kind of in summary, what would you say are the keys? Because you've practiced in the world with responsibility, you've practiced in a monastic setting. What would you say are the keys for us to keep in mind?
So one, I'll move right to that. And I guess one integrating thing of just tying those last two pieces together is that, where I came down, and I don't want to say came down because I'm still engaged in the same endeavor that I was, that you and I were engaged in 30 some years ago, is I've grown very comfortable with the fact that this self reforms a little better every time. I've kind of let go of the idea of eliminating the personal self to be enlightened awareness itself. Now, is that possible? The texts say that it is. But I've actually grown quite comfortable with the fact that I have an amazing access to something that's dear and precious to me. And when my self reforms, what do I want to do? I want to give. I want to serve. I want to help. Like simple ways. Like, my neighbor, the tree falls down in the yard, and I want to come over and cut it up with a chainsaw, But like that simple of it, I just want to help. And that's like, so I've grown comfortable with the fact that I guess I am a householder. And I'm really happy with that. So what was the last thing that you said?
So it's not so much about trying to sort of like eliminate the mind as it is about really embracing what's here right now.
If something like that were to come, it would have to be grace, because what's come has had a lot of grace, but it has not been anything about eliminating. And what would I recommend? So there are two things I think I would say. So one is, you have to look at this at a first level as a lifestyle. And it has some key components. You have to find a way to maintain your health and to actually up-level your vitality over time. And that's a big challenge in our stressful world. Big challenge for me, big challenge for all of us. But I want to say that again, and it's your way. It doesn't have to be yoga practice. It might be walking, might be running, might be weightlifting, might be all. Somehow or other, find your way to maintain your health and even over time to build vitality. And what's vitality? Vitality is that connection to that ineffable mystery at the core of us. So along with that, you need a couple principles and a couple real basics to give your life structure and meaning and purpose. And you have to find those on your own too. And certainly the traditions offer some, real guidance on that. One of the core Kripalu teachings that really moves me is it says, be the well-wisher of all. Like that's, along with wanting to accomplish my aims in life, I want to help everyone else accomplish theirs. Be the well-wisher of all. That's one of those principles for me that really gives my life meaning. And then along with, maintain your health, find those things that give your life meaning. I really feel that you have to have a regular meditation practice because the mind is so critical both in our cycling down in stress and tension or our cycling up in increased ability and proficiency and goodness. So I think that meditation practice is essential. So, with yoga, with walking, with whatever, learn to meditate.
That's awesome. Thank you. Would you maybe lead us into a closing meditation? And Danna, would you be willing to share some final words before we close?
Yes, and yes, I think. So first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for inviting us. We had this little bit of time. I hope there was something in there. It was my great pleasure, and thank you. So let your eyes close. Take a breath in, and as you let it go, just let the awareness drop down into the body. And imagine just for a moment that you could just set that mind off to the side. Thought will flow. Mental activity may well continue. But just for a moment, don't let it define you. Just let the mind be the mind. Sense what might feel a little deeper. And notice what may seem a little higher. Occupy your full identity. And from that fullness of being, take in these words.
It's titled, Love Life. Love life, the sheer adventure of sailing into the unknown. I'm not speaking here only of the bone and flesh life, the visible and material. Love the inner life, too. The life of spirit, joy, and wisdom. Fully inhabit this temple of the body, yes, and also claim the mystery of the unmanifest. The two together weaving a seamless whole that clothes you in light. Love this life, not some imaginary future when all your problems have been solved, all your rough edges sanded smooth. Love this life with its impossible demands. Open to its many gifts, investigating whether what seem like boundaries are really there at all. Maybe your true nature is vast beyond measure, and the opportunity to know yourself inside and out is worth more than any treasure.
And as you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And as you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for coming and being with us, Shobhan and Danna. And thank you all. A few quick announcements. The mindful discussion group is happening after. I think we've got tea and cookies going on. Reminder, if you'd like to be on the mailing list, you can sign up in the back. As always, thanks for your support for the class. Enjoy your evening and the deeper places it takes you to. Thank you again.